Have you ever considered why holding a genuine belief can profoundly impact your life, but at the same time, merely stating that you believe in something does not? Today, we look at the various facets of believing that can mean the difference between spiritual transformation and spiritual chaos on Soul Zero 2. And welcome to Soul Zero 2. This is the podcast that's putting the oxygen back into the Christian life one soul at a time. And I am so happy to be with you. And how many of you know that words can change over time? I read this article recently called 20 Words That Once Meant Something Very Different, where the author, Anne Curzon, shows how words didn't always mean what they mean today. For instance, what does the word nice mean? A nice person, right? Or someone who's just gentle, or they're just pleasant to be around. Did you know that the word nice used to mean silly, foolish, or simple? Speaking of silly, what about the word silly? What does that mean? Well, someone who's foolish or just foolhardy or kind of dumb, and acting goofy, right? Silly actually used to mean things worthy or blessed, or weak and vulnerable. What does the word awful mean? The word awful means this today. Oh, that's terrible. That's awful, right? But it used to mean worthy of awe. And it still does really, in its proper meaning, it means awful. The awful presence of God, it means worthy of awe. What about the word clue? Clue means something a detective tries to find. He tries to find the clue, right? But it used to mean ball of yarn. One more, maybe two more. Bachelor. Bachelor means a single young man, right? But it used to mean young knight, or the lowest rank at a university. The word bully, last one. The word bully is a person who pushes people around. But did you know that the word bully really means sweetheart? In the 1500s it did, at least. So I say that to say this. Words can change over time, and the word believe is no different. The word believe has changed over time. Today, believe generally means accepting something as true, often based on personal conviction or evidence. It can also mean intellectual assent, right? Intellectual assent to a proposition, a person, an idea, or a religion. And there was a time where the word believe, however, had a more holistic meaning. This original meaning came from old English and German words like that convey the idea of holding dear or valuing something deeply. And it emphasized intimate, heartfelt relationships rather than just intellectual assent or agreement. To the Greeks, the word believe was very interesting because it really, the way they saw it, it wasn't just about accepting something as true the way it is today, but it was about trust and faith. The word pistis, the Greek word pistis, captures the blend of belief and trust and confidence. So to believe wasn't just an intellectual exercise for them. It was something much richer, rooted in dialogue and relationship. To the Romans during Jesus' time, the word believe carried a sense of duty and loyalty, especially in the context of fides, which meant faith and trust. During Jesus' time, to believe, pistivo, was more connected to entrusting one's entire being to the truth of God. Or if they weren't a Christian, to a truth of a God, or to a truth of a person. Pistivo, belief, wasn't a passive acknowledgement, but an active, lived commitment that encompassed the whole being, the whole self, the whole mind, the whole heart, the whole action. Now, during the Enlightenment, things began to change in the 17th century. The Enlightenment, which emphasized logic, right? It emphasized reason, individualism, logic. The word believe began to become degraded, and believe came to focus more on intellectual assent and less on relational or existential commitment. And this took things from transformation to more stagnancy in terms of what believe meant. Some believe that faith is simply believing God exists. To them, I believe in God means something like I believe that there is a God, or I am of the opinion that God exists. And many assume that there is nothing more to Christian faith than to agree in God's existence. Therefore, we're all believers, right? For such people, I believe in God has roughly the same status as I believe in fairy tales. Faith becomes simply believing in a list of propositions, and this is why the Bible speaks about believing with the heart. And there's a term called halfway believers, which was talked about by theologian and historian Alistair McGrath, who says that, I quote, he says, a surprisingly large number of people who think of themselves as Christian never get further than accepting the truth of Christianity. They believe that God is there, but they have never met him. They believe that God is able to forgive sins, but they have never allowed God to forgive their sins. They believe that God is reliable, but they have never relied on him. And so he talks about how in the 18th century, this whole idea of halfway believers was termed, and he says they are on their way to faith, but they have yet to arrive. For such people, I believe in God can mean little more than I believe that God is somewhere. The richness and depth of the gospel remains unknown to them. And then John Wesley talked about almost Christians, which these Christians who do all the Christian stuff, but there's no love in it. There's no commitment in it. There's no sacrifice of the life of saying, I belong to Jesus, and I'm going to surrender whatever I have to surrender to follow him. So I believe enough to entrust my life, right? That's the word believe. That's pistivo. Pistivo signifies trust, faith, allegiance, acceptance, agreement, and approval. That's New Testament believe. That's what Jesus meant by believing. That's what Paul meant by believing. Without this kind of belief, faith becomes just a list of propositions that a person agrees to, like I know I'm a sinner, like I know God exists, like I know Jesus died for me. But unless the life is committed, unless they become a follower, they are not believing. So believing means trust. Faith is the response, again says McGrath, of our whole persons to the person of God. And this is why Psalm 19:11 says, those who know you, or rather those who know your name, trust you, for you do not abandon those who turn to you. Rather, he says, O Lord. But believing also means commitment, not just involvement. There's a difference between commitment and involvement. You've heard the story of the pig and the chicken having this conversation. One day, a chicken and a pig were strolling through the farmyard, chatting about their contributions to the farmer's breakfast table. The chicken, proud of her daily work, said, I make such an impact every morning. I lay fresh eggs for the farmer and his family. It's my gift to the world. It's my involvement in their lives. The pig listened patiently, but responded this way. That's admirable, chicken, but while you're involved, I'm committed. When it comes to breakfast, the ham on the farmer's plate requires my total sacrifice. So that's the difference between sacrifice and involvement. It's one thing to say, I'm a Christian, but it's quite another to say, I'm a follower of Jesus. That's why Jesus wasted no time saying, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. So believing means also obedience. You can't separate faith from obedience. That's why Romans 1:5 speaks of those through him. He says, through him we have received grace and apostleship to call all Gentiles to faith and obedience for his name's sake. So every believer, every follower of Jesus is called to faith and obedience. That's why James 2:17 says, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But believing also means ownership. It means that God owns me. We belong to God. 1 Corinthians 6:20 says, you are not your own. You were bought with a price. That's why St. Augustine talked about the idea of this restlessness that's in us when he says, you made us for yourself, O Lord. And our hearts are restless until their rest is in you. Why? Because God made us for himself. So believing also means unchangeableness. And we're going to bring this in for a landing now. Believing also means unchangeableness. The truth believed is absolute and unchanging. Believing means that, like the laws of physics, certain things are always true in every age, no matter what. And no matter what cultural trends there are, truth never changes. Psalm 119:89 says, "The Lord exists forever. Your word is firmly fixed in heaven." In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So that Word is Jesus. Jesus never changes. He's the embodiment of the Father and never changes. So I'm going to close out with that just to encourage you to be a true believer. Don't just be someone who says, I believe. Don't just be someone who says, yeah, God exists, and I'm happy to follow him, and, but not really follow him with your life. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a like and subscribe and share it and connect with our channels. And so till next time, I'm so happy to be with you. God bless you.